Flak ahead at 2 o'clock. See it?
I see it. Hold the course.
This is the primary target zone. We hit the IP here, then acquire the radar release point. Bomb bay doors open at 20,000 feet.
Navigation reports steady course, bearing 090.
Copy that. Monitor the gauges. Keep it tight.
Tokyo, March 9th, 1945. The night is unusually still, broken only by the distant hum of engines slicing through the darkness. From the sky, Japanese pilots peer over the sprawling city below. Streets snake like veins through a sea of wooden homes, their rooftops glinting faintly under the moonlight. Smoke curls from chimneys, but nothing yet signals the storm that is about to descend. Suddenly, a flicker of light, then another. Incendiary bombs tear through the night sky, striking with precision. Tiny sparks erupt into towering flames, consuming entire blocks in seconds. The pilots' eyes widen. Heat radiates even from their distant altitude, and a deep, gut-wrenching dread settles in their chests. Somewhere below, the first screams echo faintly, carried upward by the wind. The fire spreads, a creeping wave of destruction, red and orange against black. Streets disappear under smoke. Wooden homes collapse in a firestorms. Tokyo is no longer recognizable. The pilots, trained to defend, can do nothing but watch the enormity of the destruction pressing down on them. A city aflame, a people terrorized, and a night that will haunt them forever. In that moment, the war in the Pacific would take a new, horrifying turn. By late 1944, the tide of the Pacific War had turned decisively in favor of the United States. Years of island-hopping campaigns, grueling naval battles, and relentless air offensives had pushed Japanese forces back from territories across the Pacific. But Japan itself remained largely untouched. Its cities, factories, and civilian population were still concentrated on the home islands, making the country a formidable industrial hub for sustaining its war effort. Yet this relative security was about to be shattered. The U.S. Army Air Forces, under the command of General Curtis LeMay, had refined a new strategy, strategic bombing aimed not just at military targets, but at crippling Japan's industrial capacity and morale. The B-29 Superfortress, a long-range heavy bomber, became the centerpiece of this campaign. With a pressurized cabin allowing high-altitude flight, a payload capacity unmatched by previous aircraft, and advanced navigation systems, the B-29 could reach Japan from bases in the Mariana Islands, striking with devastating force. By late 1944, the first B-29 raids on Tokyo had begun. Though initially conducted at high altitudes, the bombers faced challenges: strong jet streams, poor accuracy, and the limits of Japanese radar. Japanese defenses, meanwhile, were struggling. Fighter pilots were increasingly inexperienced, their training programs truncated by losses across the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Army Air Service and Navy Air Service had loyal but overextended personnel. Aircraft were often outdated compared to the new American bombers. Anti-aircraft artillery, while present, was scattered and frequently ineffective against the high-flying B-29s. Night raids presented an additional problem. Darkness negated visual targeting for defenders, leaving civilians and pilots alike vulnerable to strikes they could neither predict nor intercept. Tokyo itself was an ideal target for the U.S. strategy. By 1945, the city had grown to over 6 million residents, its neighborhoods densely packed with wooden houses, shops, and industrial complexes. Fire was a constant threat in peacetime, and urban planning offered little room for effective fire breaks. The city's infrastructure was poorly suited to withstand large-scale incendiary attacks. Roads were narrow, emergency services limited, and water supplies insufficient for massive fires. Planners in Washington and on Saipan understood this vulnerability, calculating that incendiary bombs could ignite a firestorm capable of destroying vast portions of the city in a single night. The decision to shift from high-altitude precision bombing to low-altitude, nighttime incendiary raids was both tactical and practical. B-29s flying lower were less affected by the jet stream, allowing bombs to hit closer to intended targets. Using clusters of small, napalm-based incendiaries, they could ignite fires across wide areas, merging into conflagrations impossible to contain. LeMay, a meticulous and pragmatic strategist, recognized the psychological dimension as well. Civilians and defenders alike would witness destruction on a scale previously unimaginable. Reports from early missions indicated that even the most disciplined Japanese pilots found these sights disorienting, the city ablaze like a living furnace, and civilian panic spreading faster than any air raid could. By December 1944, preparations were underway for the largest, most coordinated attack on Tokyo yet. Pilots received briefings that emphasized not only the military objective, but the scale of the fires they were expected to create. Ground crews labored to ready hundreds of B-29s for the long flight across the Pacific. Incendiary bombs were meticulously packed into clusters, designed to maximize damage upon impact. Each mission was carefully timed to exploit Tokyo's nighttime darkness, creating the most terrifying conditions for anyone observing from below or the skies above. The stage was set. Japanese pilots, aware that American bombers could strike anywhere at any time, waited in their airfields, scanning the skies for the first sign of the approaching fleet. Civilians went about their routines, unaware of the scale of destruction that loomed. And in the command centers on Saipan and in Tokyo, commanders prepared for a battle unlike any the Pacific War had yet produced, a war of fire, terror, and overwhelming destruction. It was in this tense, fragile moment that the night sky over Tokyo would become a scene of horror. The city transformed from a bustling metropolis into a theater of flames that would leave an indelible mark on every pilot, soldier, and civilian who witnessed it. Tokyo, in early 1945, was a city of contradictions. Its streets bustled with commerce, children played in narrow alleyways, and factories hummed with wartime production. Yet beneath this surface lay vulnerability. The city's rapid expansion during the 1930s and 1940s had created dense neighborhoods of tightly packed wooden homes. Multi-story apartment blocks and factories were often built with little concern for fire safety, their walls and roofs easily ignitable. Water supplies, though sufficient for daily life, were inadequate to fight a city-wide fire. Firefighting units, stretched thin by wartime demands, lacked the equipment and manpower to respond to large-scale incendiary attacks. Civil defense efforts had been implemented, but they were often improvised and inconsistent. Air raid shelters existed, but many were rudimentary or overcrowded. Blackout regulations were enforced, yet street lamps, windows, and rooftops sometimes remained illuminated by mistake. Japanese authorities trained volunteers to fight fires, but most lacked experience with the firestorms that U.S. planners intended to create. Smoke masks were rare, and emergency communication systems were unreliable under attack conditions. The civilian population, while resilient, had little experience surviving large-scale aerial bombardment. The psychological toll of the impending raids weighed heavily on both the military and the populace. On the American side, the logistical preparation for the March 9th to 10th firebombing raid, Operation Meeting House, was immense. Hundreds of B-29 bombers were staged on Saipan, each meticulously loaded with clusters of M69 incendiary bombs, designed to penetrate rooftops and ignite wooden structures below. Crews trained rigorously for nighttime operations, practicing formation flying, precise bomb releases, and navigation under minimal visibility. Meteorological reports were studied in detail. Wind patterns, cloud cover, and humidity could all determine the fire's intensity. Timing was critical. The attack was planned to maximize the spread of fire across the city, overwhelming firefighting capabilities and civilian response. Japanese air defenses faced nearly impossible odds. Fighter squadrons were poorly equipped for nighttime interceptions, and radar coverage, though improving, could only provide limited warning of approaching bombers. Pilots were instructed to scramble quickly when radar detected incoming aircraft, but by the time they reached altitude, the bombers often were already over the city. Ground-based anti-aircraft artillery was sparse in some districts, and even where guns were concentrated, fire was largely ineffective against the high-speed, low-altitude formations of B-29s. For many pilots, the raid would be a terrifying spectacle they could not control, a massive inferno in which civilians and their own comrades were at the mercy of a weapon unlike any they had encountered. The Japanese military command understood the stakes. Reports of earlier raids indicated that the psychological impact on both civilians and defenders was severe. Pilots who witnessed the destruction often returned shaken, their morale shaken by the enormity of the fires and the helplessness of watching a city burn from above. Senior commanders debated responses, but with fuel shortages, limited aircraft, and inexperienced personnel, few practical options existed. The challenge was not simply to protect Tokyo, but to maintain some semblance of order in a situation that threatened to spiral beyond control. The timing of the raid was deliberate. March was chosen for its dry weather, which would enhance the incendiary effect. The B-29s were ordered to fly in waves, a continuous stream of aircraft dropping bombs across the city to ensure that individual fires merged into a firestorm. Each bomber carried dozens of small, napalm-laced bombs designed to ignite on impact and spread rapidly. This new strategy departed from previous high-altitude precision bombing. It was no longer just about damaging factories or infrastructure, but about creating overwhelming destruction that would break both the physical city and the spirit of those defending it. Civilians and pilots alike were unknowingly preparing to face a new reality of warfare, a night in which fire would become the weapon, terror the secondary effect, and survival uncertain. Tokyo's wooden districts, labyrinthine streets, and dense population made it a tinderbox. The city was ready to burn, and the pilots in the sky, trained to defend and fight, would soon confront a nightmare that no training could fully prepare them for. In this convergence of technological preparation, urban vulnerability, and human unpreparedness, the stage was set. The city's defenses, the pilot's skill, and the civilians' resilience would all be tested in the flames that were about to engulf Tokyo. For the civilians of Tokyo, life on the eve of the raid was deceptively ordinary. Children played in narrow alleyways, shopkeepers tended stalls, and families prepared for the evening meal. But beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a fragile tension. Many Tokyo residents had experienced air raids before, yet nothing had prepared them for the scale of destruction the U.S. Army Air Forces were about to unleash. Volunteers in the civil defense brigades carried buckets, sand, and rudimentary firefighting tools, their faces tense but resolute. They could sense the approaching storm, though few understood the firepower they would face. Above the city, Japanese pilots felt a different kind of dread. Trained to intercept and defend, they now faced bombers designed to operate beyond their reach. Flying over the city at night, they glimpsed Tokyo's rooftops glittering under moonlight, unaware that the next hours would transform the landscape into a burning inferno. As the first incendiaries fell, pilots reported a surreal sight. columns of fire erupting from multiple points simultaneously, flames merging into a searing wave that advanced relentlessly. Even seasoned aviators, hardened by combat, were shaken by the sheer scale and intensity of the firestorm. For many, the helplessness of witnessing a city consumed by flames was a psychological shock that would carry long after the raid ended. The U.S. attack strategy relied on meticulous planning and precise execution. The B-29 superfortresses approached in tight formations, descending to lower altitudes to evade the jet stream and improve bombing accuracy. Each bomber released clusters of M69 incendiary bombs, small but highly effective devices designed to penetrate rooftops and ignite flammable materials. Pilots coordinated with exacting timing, ensuring that fires across the city would merge into a single, uncontrollable blaze. Nighttime offered a tactical advantage for the attackers and a nightmare scenario for defenders. Darkness masked the bombers' approach, rendering Japanese radar and anti-aircraft efforts partially ineffective. Fighters scrambled to intercept, but limited numbers and inexperienced crews made organized defense nearly impossible. Ground commanders watched as the first wave struck, powerless to prevent the conflagration. The U.S. strategy prioritized area-wide destruction over precision targeting of factories or infrastructure. The goal was clear: ignite a firestorm, overwhelm civil defense, and break the morale of both military and civilian populations. The layout of Tokyo itself inadvertently aided this strategy. Narrow streets, densely packed wooden homes, and industrial districts clustered together allowed small fires to merge rapidly. The Americans understood this vulnerability. Observing reconnaissance photographs and prior bombing missions, planners had identified districts where incendiaries would have maximum effect. Each wave of B-29s was timed to exploit wind direction, humidity, and city topology. By the time Japanese defenders reacted, fires had already merged, creating a wall of flame advancing through residential and commercial districts alike. At the heart of the raid's destructive power was the B-29 superfortress. A marvel of aviation engineering, it represented the pinnacle of American strategic bombing capabilities. Pressurized cabins allowed high-altitude flight, shielding crews from extreme cold and reducing fatigue during long missions. Advanced navigation equipment enabled precise targeting even in darkness, while defensive armaments offered some protection against enemy fighters. Each aircraft could carry up to 20 tons of bombs, a payload capable of devastating an entire city district. Equally important were the incendiary devices themselves. The M69 bomb, roughly the size of a large soda can, was designed to ignite upon impact and spread fire quickly across wooden structures. Clusters of these bombs created a network of simultaneous ignition points. When dropped in coordinated waves, the resulting fires merged into an intense firestorm, generating winds strong enough to pull oxygen into the blaze and propel flames across city blocks. The effect was catastrophic. Roofs ignited, homes collapsed, and smoke columns rose thousands of feet into the night sky, visible to pilots and civilians alike. The combination of advanced aircraft, precise timing, and incendiary technology created a synergy that Japanese defenses could not match. Pilots on both sides recognized the terrifying effectiveness of the strategy. From above, Tokyo became a living inferno, and even those trained to fight in the skies could do little to mitigate the human and structural toll unfolding below. This convergence of human vulnerability, tactical planning, and technological superiority created the conditions for the raid's unprecedented destruction. Civilians would experience terror in its rawest form. Pilots would confront fear beyond combat, and the city itself would be transformed in ways that would reverberate throughout history. The orchestration of the Tokyo firebombing required meticulous leadership on both sides of the conflict. On the American side, General Curtis LeMay had transformed the B-29 campaign into a precise instrument of devastation. LeMay, known for his methodical and often ruthless approach, prioritized results above all. He recognized that high-altitude precision bombing had failed to achieve decisive results against Japan's dispersed industrial centers. Switching to low-altitude, nighttime incendiary raids was a calculated decision, designed to exploit vulnerabilities in Tokyo's construction, weather patterns, and civil defense capabilities. LeMay coordinated every detail. Flight paths, altitude, bomb loadouts, and timing of waves were all calculated with the goal of creating maximum destruction while minimizing the risk of aircraft loss. Reconnaissance flights mapped Tokyo's districts, identifying wooden residential neighborhoods as primary targets. Communication with ground crews, intelligence officers, and pilots ensured each mission was synchronized. In the control rooms on Saipan, planners watched every radar blip, every formation, ensuring that waves of B-29s reached their designated zones with precision. Japanese leadership faced an entirely different challenge. Commanders struggled to allocate scarce resources across vast urban areas. Fighter pilots were few and often inexperienced. Anti-aircraft batteries, though strategically placed, lacked the coverage and firepower to repel the relentless waves of bombers. Civilian evacuation plans were incomplete, and coordination between military and municipal authorities was fragmented. Commanders understood that Tokyo was vulnerable, yet few could imagine the scale of destruction that would soon engulf the city. The limitations of Japanese leadership became tragically apparent as fire spread uncontrollably. Pilots scrambled with inadequate guidance, and civilians fled into chaos. For the pilots of the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy Air Services, the raid was an unprecedented test of both skill and morale. Many were young, some barely trained, thrust into a scenario they had not fully anticipated. Night raids compounded the difficulty, requiring navigation by moonlight or rudimentary radar signals. Yet it was the fire itself that inflicted the greatest psychological toll. From above, pilots could see the flames devouring Tokyo's wooden districts, smoke rising like black columns into the night sky. The roar of burning buildings, mingled with distant sirens and cries, created an eerie, almost surreal soundscape. Pilots reported a sensation of helplessness. Their planes were designed for combat, yet they could not halt the destruction. The firestorm seemed alive, consuming everything in its path, impervious to intervention. For some, the experience left deep emotional scars. The terror of witnessing a city's destruction, combined with the fear of failing in their duty, eroded confidence and morale. Even veteran aviators described feelings of shock and dread, emotions that lingered long after the raid ended. Operation Meeting House was not merely a military tactic. It was an assault on an entire urban population. The moral implications of deliberately targeting residential districts weighed heavily on historians and military analysts alike. While American planners justified the raids as necessary to hasten Japan's surrender and minimize overall casualties in the broader war, the human cost was staggering. By the end of the March 9th to 10th raid, estimates suggest over 100,000 civilians were killed and more than 1 million left homeless. The firestorm, a product of coordinated incendiary bombing, created conditions in which escape was often impossible. Narrow streets became corridors of death. Smoke inhalation claimed victims before flames reached them, and wooden homes offered no protection. For pilots observing from above, these human tragedies were immediate and visible, the cries and movements of panicked civilians etched into memory. Ethically, the raid highlighted the grim calculus of total war. Every fire set was a tactical victory. Every collapsed home a blow to industrial and military capacity, but each also represented a human life extinguished. The juxtaposition of strategic necessity and moral consequence created a profound tension, one that pilots, planners, and later historians would grapple with. Even those who executed the raid with precision and efficiency could not escape the sight of a city consumed by flames, civilians running through streets of fire, and the overwhelming destruction of life and infrastructure. The convergence of leadership decisions, pilot experience, and moral consequences paints a complex picture. Tokyo's firebombing was more than an operation. It was a crucible of human emotion, tactical ingenuity, and ethical ambiguity. Civilians burned, pilots watched in horror, and commanders on both sides faced the consequences of decisions made months or years in advance. This multifaceted perspective sets the stage for the climax, the night when the fires reached their zenith, when terror became tangible, and the city of Tokyo was transformed forever. March 9th, 1945. The night was moonless, a black canvas over Tokyo, perfect for the mission the U.S. Army Air Forces had planned. From Saipan, waves of B-29 superfortresses lifted into the sky, their engines humming a mechanical prelude to devastation. Each bomber carried a deadly cargo, clusters of M-69 incendiary bombs, small cylinders filled with napalm-based gel, designed to ignite upon impact and spread fire across the city's wooden districts. Pilots checked instruments, formation positions, and bomb release timings. Precision was everything. Any miscalculation could reduce the firestorm's efficiency. As the fleet approached the Japanese mainland, Tokyo's air defenses were on high alert. Radar operators detected incoming formations, scrambling fighter units to intercept. Pilots rushed into the dark skies, their silhouettes barely visible against the faint glow of the city below. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, tracer rounds cutting through the night, but most B-29s were already at altitudes or speeds that rendered Japanese fire largely ineffective. The defenders' desperation was evident, yet futile. From the cockpit of one Japanese fighter, the first incendiary bomb struck. Tiny sparks erupted into towering columns of flame. Smoke billowed upward, carrying the smell of burning wood and fabric into the atmosphere. Streets vanished beneath waves of fire. Entire neighborhoods became engulfed in flames within minutes. Pilots watching from above reported an eerie, almost surreal sight. The city was alive with fire, red and orange tongues licking the darkness, merging into a single, massive blaze that spread with unstoppable force. The firestorm generated its own wind, drawing oxygen into the inferno and propelling flames across blocks. Wooden homes, shops, and factories collapsed under the intense heat. Civilians fled into the streets, often in panic, only to be trapped by advancing fire or smoke. The human cost was immediate and staggering. From above, Japanese pilots could see the chaos, hear distant sirens and screams carried on the wind, and feel the weight of helplessness pressing upon them. Trained for combat, they were unprepared for a destruction so absolute. The B-29s dropped in waves, each successive formation reinforcing the conflagration below. Pilots coordinated releases with meticulous timing, ensuring that fires across the city merged seamlessly into an ever-expanding blaze. Buildings ignited not in isolation, but in clusters, a network of destruction that created a firestorm hundreds of meters across. The roar of flames was deafening from the ground. From above, it was an unrelenting spectacle of light and smoke. Pilots described a feeling of detachment, as if witnessing a disaster in a foreign land, Yet the knowledge that their own city and countrymen suffered was unavoidable. In some districts, fire consumed entire blocks before any attempt at firefighting could begin. Volunteer brigades tried to douse flames with buckets and hoses, but the intensity of the blaze rendered their efforts futile. Water sources were quickly depleted, and narrow streets became corridors of death. Pilots circling overhead could see civilians trapped in alleys, homes collapsing around them, and the relentless advance of the fire consuming everything in its path. As the night wore on, the firestorm reached its zenith. Flames rose thousands of feet into the sky, visible to every pilot in the area. The heat generated strong winds, accelerating the spread of fire across previously untouched districts. Smoke choked the air, obscuring vision and making navigation dangerous for Japanese aircraft attempting interceptions. Pilots were forced to maneuver carefully, not only to avoid the flames below, but also to evade enemy anti-aircraft fire and maintain formation with their units. Reports from the sky described an apocalyptic scene. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath a sea of fire. Bridges and roads collapsed, and industrial areas were reduced to molten ruins. Civilians ran blindly, seeking safety in parks, rivers, and open spaces, often encountering flames they could not escape. Japanese pilots, tasked with defending the city, found themselves powerless to alter the course of destruction. Many were overwhelmed by emotion, some struggling to maintain focus as the reality of Tokyo's devastation unfolded beneath them. The first wave of destruction set the tone for hours of relentless bombing. The city's wooden districts, already vulnerable, were consumed rapidly, and the firestorm's momentum became self-sustaining. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots and civilians alike was immediate. Shock, terror, and disbelief dominated the night. From the air, the city no longer resembled a familiar home. It had become a labyrinth of fire and smoke, an unrecognizable inferno that would leave a permanent mark on those who survived and those who observed it from the sky. In this night of fire, terror, and overwhelming destruction, the balance of the Pacific War shifted. Tokyo, the beating heart of Japan's industrial and civilian life, had been brought to its knees. The pilots who had watched from above carried the memory of a city consumed, and civilians faced the unimaginable reality of survival in the face of a modern inferno. The next phase of destruction would only deepen the city's suffering and cement the raid's place in history as one of the most devastating aerial attacks ever executed. As the night deepened, Tokyo became a city unrecognizable. Flames licked the sky, towering above streets and rooftops, consuming everything in their path. The firestorm generated hurricane-like winds, pulling oxygen into the inferno and accelerating its spread. Entire districts disappeared beneath the blaze, and smoke columns stretched miles into the darkened sky. From above, Japanese pilots could see streets vanish, homes collapse, and the silhouettes of fleeing civilians. The destruction was methodical and overwhelming, a terrifying testament to the precision and planning of the American attack. The human toll was immediate. Civilians sought refuge wherever they could: parks, rivers, open fields, but escape was often impossible. Families were separated in the chaos. Those who survived the flames sometimes succumbed to smoke inhalation or injuries caused by collapsing structures. Hospitals, already strained by years of war, were quickly overwhelmed. Pilots watching from the sky reported seeing entire neighborhoods reduced to ash. The cries of those trapped carried faintly on the wind, a haunting soundtrack to the night's devastation. Japanese fighter pilots scrambled repeatedly, attempting to intercept the relentless waves of B-29s, but the night raids rendered most defensive maneuvers ineffective. Radar provided only limited warning, and the speed and altitude of the bombers prevented effective engagement. Pilots described a surreal sense of helplessness, witnessing destruction they could neither prevent nor mitigate. Even experienced aviators, accustomed to combat over distant islands, were shaken by the intensity of the firestorm below. For many, it was a psychological trauma that would last long after the flames had died. On the ground, civil defense teams fought valiantly, but were quickly overwhelmed. Fire brigades, volunteer units, and military personnel attempted to control blazes with limited equipment and water supplies. Narrow streets and densely packed wooden buildings allowed small fires to merge rapidly, creating walls of flame that could not be stopped. In some districts, volunteers carried buckets of water or sand only to be driven back by heat and smoke. The fire's intensity rendered traditional firefighting tactics ineffective. Tokyo's wooden architecture had become a fuel-laden trap. By midnight, the firestorm had engulfed nearly 16 square miles of the city. Industrial areas, residential neighborhoods, and commercial districts alike were consumed. Bridges collapsed, rail lines were destroyed, and critical infrastructure was reduced to molten ruins. Pilots observed the full extent of the conflagration. Red-orange flames mirrored in rivers, rooftops vanishing, smoke rising in immense columns. The scale of destruction was unprecedented, dwarfing earlier raids on other Japanese cities. The psychological impact on Japanese leadership was immediate. Reports from the city conveyed staggering casualties and total destruction in multiple districts. Commanders faced the grim reality that conventional defenses, fighter aircraft, anti-aircraft artillery, civil defense brigades, had failed to stop the onslaught. Morale was shaken among both military personnel and civilians. Pilots returning from the night's mission described a city unrecognizable, civilians in terror, and a firestorm that seemed unstoppable. The inability to protect the capital struck at the core of Japanese confidence, signaling that even the heart of the nation was vulnerable. Meanwhile, the B-29 crews maintained relentless focus. Waves continued to descend on the city, dropping incendiaries with calculated precision. Each successive pass reinforced the firestorm, ensuring that no district remained untouched. Pilots reported navigating through smoke, flames reflecting off clouds, and turbulence created by the intense heat rising from the city. The raid was more than a series of bomb drops. It was a symphony of destruction, orchestrated with military precision and technological superiority. By dawn, the inferno had finally begun to subside in areas where bombs had been depleted and the most flammable sections had burned away. Tokyo, once a bustling metropolis, had been transformed into a vast expanse of charred ruins. Pilots returned to base exhausted and haunted by the scale of devastation they had witnessed. The firestorm had claimed tens of thousands of lives, left over 1 million homeless, and reduced entire districts to ash. The March 9th to 10th raid became the decisive turning point in Japan's urban warfare. Civilians endured unimaginable suffering. Pilots carried the memory of a city consumed, and Japanese leadership confronted the reality that their capital, and by extension, their nation, could no longer be defended against America's new strategy of total aerial warfare. The firestorm was not simply a tactical success. It was a psychological weapon, reshaping perceptions of vulnerability, power, and the very nature of modern conflict. In the wake of the raid, the full consequences of the night's destruction would become apparent. Casualties mounted, infrastructure lay in ruins, and the Japanese military was forced to confront the stark reality that the war was entering a new, even more destructive phase. The aftermath would be measured not only in physical destruction, but in human suffering, strategic recalculations, and the enduring terror witnessed by those in the skies above and on the streets below. When the flames finally began to subside, the city that had once been Tokyo was barely recognizable. Streets that had bustled with life were reduced to ash and rubble. Entire neighborhoods had vanished, replaced by blackened remnants of wooden homes, collapsed factories, and charred infrastructure. The firestorm had consumed over 16 square miles in a matter of hours, leaving a landscape of devastation so complete it would take decades to fully document. Casualties were staggering. Estimates indicate that over 100,000 civilians perished in a single night, with many more injured. The streets had become death traps, where escape from the advancing fire was impossible for countless families. Hospitals, many damaged or destroyed in the raid, were quickly overwhelmed, unable to provide treatment for the injured. Survivors wandered through the ruins, searching for family members or anything salvaged from the inferno. Water shortages compounded the crisis as fire brigades, already stretched beyond capacity, struggled to provide relief to those trapped in the smoldering remains of their neighborhoods. Japanese pilots returned to their bases profoundly shaken. Even those who had flown numerous combat missions found the sight of their capital reduced to flames almost unbearable. Pilots reported a pervasive sense of guilt and helplessness, watching helplessly as civilians and infrastructure alike were destroyed. Memoirs and later interviews reveal that many were haunted for years by the images of the firestorm. Streets disappearing under fire, smoke rising in immense columns, and the chaotic cries of terrified civilians echoing in their minds. Military command quickly began assessing the scale of destruction. Reports sent from the city detailed not only the staggering loss of life, but also the crippling damage to Tokyo's industrial and logistical infrastructure. Factories producing essential wartime materials were destroyed, transport networks were severed, and residential districts, the backbone of labor and morale, were decimated. The military faced a grim reality. The heart of Japan's industrial and civilian capacity had been shattered in a single night. The psychological impact on Japan's leadership and military personnel was profound. Emperor Hirohito, senior military commanders, and government officials were confronted with evidence that even the capital, long considered secure, was vulnerable to modern aerial warfare. Fighter pilots, tasked with defending the city, had been unable to intercept or mitigate the attacks. Anti-aircraft units had proven largely ineffective, and civil defense efforts had collapsed under the sheer scale of the firestorm. The raid demonstrated not only the destructive power of the B-29 superfortress, but also the devastating psychological effect of total urban bombing on both military and civilian morale. For ordinary Tokyo residents, the aftermath was immediate and tangible. Families searched through rubble for the remains of loved ones. Many were left homeless, forced to seek refuge in parks, temples, and makeshift shelters. Essential services such as water, electricity, and medical care were disrupted, compounding the suffering. Firefighters and volunteers, exhausted from battling blazes that could not be contained, now faced the monumental task of preventing additional fires from spreading in the wake of the raid. Daily life, already strained by years of war, had been thrown into chaos. The city's destruction also sent shockwaves through the Japanese military strategy. Commanders realized that the defensive measures they had relied on, fighter aircraft, anti-aircraft batteries, and civil defense volunteers, were insufficient against large-scale incendiary raids. Planning for future raids would have to take into account both the overwhelming firepower of the U.S. bombers and the psychological toll inflicted on pilots and civilians alike. The experience fundamentally altered Japan's perception of its vulnerability, revealing that no city, no matter how central or symbolically important, could be considered safe from destruction. This initial aftermath set the tone for subsequent raids. The scale of destruction in Tokyo and the emotional trauma inflicted on its population and defenders provided a grim template for the next stages of the U.S. bombing campaign. The human cost, coupled with the military and infrastructural losses, would force Japan to confront a reality that no military plan or civil defense strategy could fully mitigate. The night of March 9th to 10th, 1945 had ended, but the consequences were only beginning. Civilians and military personnel alike faced the daunting task of survival amid ruins. The psychological scars, infrastructural devastation, and strategic recalculations would define the weeks and months that followed, leading inevitably to the broader consequences of the firebombing campaign. In the days following the March 9th to 10th firebombing, Tokyo's shattered landscape became a grim testament to the destructive power of modern warfare. Emergency services struggled to contain lingering fires, provide medical aid, and manage the flow of displaced civilians. Over 1 million people were left homeless, forced to seek shelter in parks, temples, and public buildings. Makeshift communities emerged amid ruins, where food, water, and medical care were scarce. The psychological toll was immense. Survivors wandered through charred streets, haunted by the loss of family, friends, and the familiarity of their neighborhoods. The Japanese military faced urgent strategic recalculations. The vulnerability of Tokyo demonstrated that traditional defenses, fighter intercepts, anti-aircraft artillery, and civil defense measures were insufficient against sustained, coordinated incendiary attacks. Commanders had to acknowledge that the United States now possessed the capacity to inflict catastrophic destruction on Japan's core cities with impunity. Plans to reinforce urban defenses were implemented, but shortages of fuel, aircraft, and trained personnel limited their effectiveness. Pilots were forced to contend not only with the enemy above, but with the psychological burden of failing to protect their capital from devastation. For Japanese pilots, the raid left deep emotional scars. Many reported feelings of helplessness and guilt, having witnessed the annihilation of neighborhoods and the suffering of civilians without the means to intervene. Even experienced aviators described a lingering trauma. Some would later recount sleepless nights haunted by visions of firestorm-ravaged streets, the cries of the terrified, and the distant flicker of flames visible from their cockpits. The memory of the firestorm became a defining moment for many, shaping their perception of the war's human cost and the vulnerability of the nation they had sworn to defend. From the Allied perspective, the raid was a tactical and psychological success. Operation Meeting House demonstrated the devastating efficiency of incendiary bombing against densely packed wooden cities. Military planners noted not only the physical destruction, over 16 square miles of Tokyo reduced to ashes, but the demoralizing effect on both civilians and military personnel. The psychological impact was immediate. Japanese morale had been shaken. Commanders recognized their inability to defend the capital, and the civilian population faced profound fear and uncertainty. The raid set a precedent for subsequent operations, confirming that strategic firebombing could decisively weaken Japan's industrial capacity while simultaneously eroding morale. The broader implications of the raid became clear as reports reached Tokyo's government and military command. Industrial output in critical sectors had been severely disrupted. Transportation networks were crippled, hampering the movement of troops, supplies, and resources. Civilian infrastructure, housing, water distribution, medical facilities have been decimated, creating a logistical and humanitarian crisis. Strategically, Japan faced the sobering reality that the home islands were no longer invulnerable. The firebombing campaign had proven that even the nation's core cities could be reduced to rubble in a single night. In addition to physical and strategic consequences, the raid left an indelible mark on Japan's perception of modern warfare. The combination of technological superiority, precise tactical planning, and psychological impact had created a new model of destruction. Civilians and military personnel alike realized that total war had arrived on an unprecedented scale. The lessons were clear. Cities were no longer safe havens. Air defense alone could not guarantee protection, and survival often depended on chance, location, and immediate access to basic resources. By the end of March, Tokyo began a slow and painful recovery. Fire brigades cleared rubble where possible, temporary shelters were established, and limited food and medical aid were distributed. Yet the psychological and societal effects lingered. Survivors grappled with grief and trauma, while pilots and military personnel carried the memory of that night with them. A constant reminder of both vulnerability and the immense destructive power of modern aerial warfare. The firebombing campaign had irrevocably altered the conduct of war in the Pacific, signaling a shift toward total destruction, strategic terror, and the stark reality that no city, or its people, was beyond reach. This devastation, both physical and psychological, naturally leads into reflection on the broader meaning of the firebombing. Its historical significance, the evolution of modern warfare, and the human cost borne by civilians and pilots alike. The firebombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9th to 10th, 1945 was more than a tactical operation. It was a demonstration of the terrifying evolution of modern warfare. In a single night, a city of millions was reduced to ash, homes and factories consumed, and lives extinguished with ruthless efficiency. For Japanese pilots, the experience was profoundly unsettling. Trained to defend their nation, they were forced to witness its destruction from above, powerless to intervene. Civilians caught in a maelstrom of fire and smoke endured terror on an unimaginable scale. Strategically, the raid marked a turning point in the Pacific War. It showcased the ability of long-range bombers, coordinated incendiary tactics, and meticulous planning to devastate urban centers and disrupt a nation's industrial and civilian infrastructure. The psychological dimension was as significant as the physical destruction. Morale faltered, fear spread, and leadership faced the sobering reality that no city, not even the capital, was safe. The firebombing became a model for subsequent operations, influencing both Allied planning and a broader understanding of total war. Yet beyond strategy and technology, the firestorm revealed the human cost of modern conflict. The screams of those trapped, the despair etched on survivors' faces, and the helplessness of pilots forced to watch their homeland burn left scars that endured long after the flames had died. History remembers not only the destruction of Tokyo, but the personal toll, the terror, grief, and trauma etched into the lives of those who endured it. In retrospect, Tokyo's Night of Fire stands as a stark reminder of the devastating potential of human ingenuity when harnessed for destruction. It underscores the fragile boundary between tactical necessity and moral consequence, the intersection of technology and humanity, and the profound vulnerability of civilian populations in total war. The city's destruction reshaped not only the physical landscape, but also the perception of warfare itself, a vivid testament to both the power and peril of modern aerial conflict. And in the memories of those who watched from the skies above, Tokyo would remain a city of fire, fear, and indelible human suffering, a night that would haunt the annals of history forever.